He woke up before sunrise, as he always did. The apartment was quiet except for the low on the fridge and the soft breathing coming from the small bedroom down the hall. He stood for a moment near the doorway, watching his child sleep, blanket kicked halfway off like every other morning. That sight alone was enough to remind him why he worked so hard, why he never complained, and why he never allowed himself to hope for more than stability. After his wife passed away, life became smaller but heavier. Every decision carried weight. Every dollar mattered. Every hour was planned. He learned how to cook, clean, help with homework, and still show up to work on time. He became both parents without ever saying the words out loud. People often praise him, but praise didn't help pay rent or ease the ache that settled in during quiet nights. Driving became his profession not because it was glamorous, but because it was honest. He drove executives, tourists, and sometimes people who barely looked at him. He knew the city better than most, every shortcut and quiet street. His car was clean, his manners careful, and his silence respected. That was how he survived, by being reliable and invisible. That morning felt like any other until his phone buzzed with a notification from the agency. A last-minute assignment. High priority. Private driver request. The message didn't explain much, only that the client required discretion and professionalism. The pay was more than usual, enough to cover groceries and school supplies with a little left over. He accepted without hesitation. After dropping his child off at school, he cleaned the car one more time, even though it was already spotless. He adjusted the mirror, straightened his jacket, and took a slow breath. He reminded himself that it was just another job. The pickup location was outside a tall glass building downtown. Security was tight. He checked in, waited, and kept his eyes forward. When she finally stepped out, he noticed her confidence first. Not loud or demanding, but calm and controlled. She moved like someone used to being watched. Her clothes were elegant but simple, and her expression was tired in a way money couldn't fix. She greeted him politely and slid into backseat. He introduced himself in the usual professional tone and confirmed the destination. She nodded, then surprised him by asking how his morning was going. Most clients didn't ask that. He answered briefly, keeping his focus on the road. As the car moved through traffic, silence filled the space, but wasn't uncomfortable. After a few minutes, she spoke again, this time asking about his child. He hadn't mentioned having one, which caught him off guard. She explained she noticed a small backpack in the back seat. He smiled without realizing it and gave a simple answer. That was how the conversation started. Slowly, naturally, no forced questions or awkward pauses. They talked about school schedules, long work days, and the strange balance between responsibility and exhaustion. She didn't talk about her wealth or her title. He didn't talk about loss. Still, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Two people carrying different burdens, but weight all the same. He learned she was attending a formal family gathering. Important, traditional, the kind of event where appearances mattered more than comfort. She joked lightly about how tense those evenings could be, how every word felt judged. He listened without interrupting, offering understanding instead of advice. By the time they arrived, the air between them felt warmer, more human than professional. He parked where instructed and stepped out to open the door. As she exited the car, her posture shifted, her shoulders tightened, and her smile became practiced. Standing near the entrance were her parents, well-dressed and stern, surrounded by people who looked equally polished. Her parents' eyes went straight past her and landed on him. The look wasn't curious. It was assessing, cold. He felt it immediately. He lowered his gaze slightly, ready to step back into his role. But before he could move, she did something no one expected. She turned around, placed one hand on his arm, and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic or exaggerated. It was quick, deliberate, and unmistakable. The world seemed to pause. Conversation stopped. Faces froze. Her parents stared as if reality had cracked open in front of them. He didn't move. For a second, he couldn't breathe. His mind raced with questions and fear. Had he misunderstood? Had he crossed some invisible line without knowing? He looked at her, confused, his heart pounding. She met his eyes calmly, as if she had planned this moment. Then she turned back to her parents and said, in a steady voice, that she would see them inside. The silence around them grew heavier. Her parents didn't speak. The guests pretended not to stare, but everyone was watching. He felt every eye on him, felt his face burn with embarrassment and uncertainty. She leaned closer to him and quietly thanked him for the drive. Her expression softened just slightly. Then she walked away, heels clicking against the floor, leaving him standing beside the car with more questions than answers. He sat back in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel, trying to steady his breathing. His phone buzzed with another notification, but he ignored it. His thoughts were loud. He worried about his job, about rumors, about how something so simple could turn into a problem he couldn't afford. He reminded himself that he had done nothing wrong. He had been respectful, professional, honest. Still, the world didn't always care about truth, especially when power was involved. As he drove away, he replayed the moment again and again, the way she looked at him, the way her parents reacted. The weight of that kiss wasn't romantic. It was symbolic. It felt like a line had been drawn, one he hadn't asked for but was now standing on. Back at home later that evening, after helping with homework and preparing dinner, the moment still lingered in his mind. His child laughed at something on the table, unaware of how close the world felt to shifting. He smiled back, hiding the storm behind his eyes. He didn't know what would come next. He didn't know why she did it, or what it would mean for either of them. All he knew was that something had changed, and once things changed at that level, they rarely went back to the way they were before. That night, long after the apartment went quiet again, his phone buzzed once more. This time, he looked. The message wasn't from the agency. It was from a private number. It simply said, "I hope I didn't put you in a difficult position. We should talk." He stared at the screen, heart beating faster, knowing that whatever came next would be anything but ordinary. The next morning did not feel normal. He woke up with the same alarm, the same routine, but his body felt heavier, like he was carrying a secret he never asked for. While making breakfast, he checked his phone again, half expecting another message. There was nothing new. The silence made things worse. He took his child to school as usual, listened to stories about classmates and small worries that felt big to a young mind. He nodded, smiled, and gave advice, but his thoughts drifted. That single moment from a night before kept replaying in his head. The kiss, the stunned faces, the way the air seemed to change. At work, the agency called him in. That alone made his stomach tighten. Usually, calls were quick and simple. This one wasn't. He sat in the small office, hands folded, waiting while the manager scrolled through messages on a screen. The manager finally looked up and asked him, calmly but firmly, if anything unusual had happened during his last assignment. He chose his words carefully. He explained the facts. He didn't add emotion. He didn't guess motives. He simply said that the client made a personal gesture at the end of the ride, and that he did not encourage or expect it. The room stayed quiet. The manager sighed and said the client's family had already contacted the company, not to complain about the service, but to question his professionalism. The word stung. He had built his entire reputation on professionalism. He felt heat rise in his chest, but he stayed calm. He spoke about his record, his years of clean service, his respect for boundaries. The manager nodded and admitted there were no complaints about his work itself. Still, the situation was sensitive. Powerful people did not like surprises. He was asked to take a few days off while the agency reviewed the situation. It was said politely, but the meaning was clear. He walked out with a forced thank you and a knot in his stomach. Days off meant no pay. No pay meant stress. Stress meant worry that reached far beyond himself. Outside, the city moved on like nothing had happened. People laughed, rushed, talked on phones. None of them knew his world felt like it was tilting. By the afternoon, messages started appearing online, not with his name, but with blurred photos and vague words. Mysterious driver. Unexpected scene at elite family event. People speculated freely. Some laughed, some judged, some turned it into entertainment. He didn't click on most of them. He had learned long ago that reading strangers' opinions never helped. Still, the fear remained. Not fear for his pride, but for his child. He never wanted that life touched by public noise. That evening his phone rang. It was the private number again. He answered this time. Her voice was calm but serious. She apologized right away. Not in a dramatic way, but honestly. She said she hadn't meant to cause trouble. She explained that her parents had been pressuring her for years to live a life that looked perfect but felt empty. The kiss, she said, wasn't about rebellion or attention. It was about honesty. He listened quietly. When she finished, he told her about the agency, the time off, and the risk to his job. There was no anger in his voice, just truth. She went silent for a moment, then said she would fix it. He told her gently that some things couldn't be fixed with influence. The next day, the situation escalated. Her parents requested a meeting, not with him directly, but through legal and professional channels. The agency informed him that the family wanted assurances that he would never be assigned to their daughter again. It felt like erasure, like he was a mistake they wanted removed. He agreed without argument. He had no interest in forcing himself into a world that didn't want him. All he asked was fairness. His record, his pay, his dignity. Meanwhile, she was fighting her own battle. Her parents were furious. Not loud fury, but controlled disappointment, which somehow felt worse. They accused her of humiliating the family, of risking reputation, of lowering standards. They spoke about class and image, not feelings. She pushed back for the first time in years. She told them she was tired of living by rules that ignored character and only rewarded appearance. The argument ended without resolution, but the ground had shifted. Despite her anger, she kept checking on him. Short messages, simple questions. Was he okay? Was his child okay? He replied carefully. He appreciated concern, but he was cautious. Their worlds were still far apart. A few days later, something unexpected happened. The agency called again. This time, the tone was different. They informed him that after reviewing everything, they found no fault in his conduct. The family's request to remove him permanently was denied. His time off would be paid. Relief washed over him, but it was mixed with exhaustion. The problem wasn't fully gone. People still talked. I still judged. And he still had to protect the one person who mattered most. When he picked up his child from school that day, he noticed a parent staring a little too long. A whisper, a glance. It made his chest tighten. He realized the story might already be spreading beyond the internet. That night, he sat alone after his child fell asleep. He thought about how easily a single moment could shake a carefully built life. He hadn't chased attention. He hadn't broken rules. Yet he was still paying a price. Another message came from her. This one was longer. She said her parents wanted to know more about him. Not to apologize. Not yet, but because they were confused. They expected scandal and found none. That confusion bothered them. He didn't know how to feel about that. Being examined like a puzzle wasn't comforting. Still, he agreed to answer basic questions through proper channels. He had nothing to hide. As the days passed, the story shifted again. Online voices grew quieter. New distractions took over. But within her family, the tension remained. Her parents dug into his past, expecting shortcuts or hidden motives. What they found instead were years of steady work, no complaints, no scandals. A man who turned down risky opportunities to be home by dinner. A man who donated time at school events and never spoke about it. A man who lived simply because his child needed stability more than luxury. That discovery didn't soften them right away, but it unsettled them. He felt the weight of being watched, but also something else, a strange sense that truth, slow and quiet, was doing its work. He didn't know where it would lead. He didn't know what role, if any, he would play in her life beyond that single moment. What he did know was this. The shock hadn't ended with the kiss. It was only beginning. The attention did not disappear. It only became quieter, like a room where people stop talking when you walk in but keep listening. He felt at work, at school pickup, even at the grocery store. Nothing was said directly, but small things changed. Smiles were shorter. Conversations paused. People wondered who he was without asking him. He stayed focused on routine. Wake up early. Breakfast. School drop-off. Work. Dinner. Homework. Bedtime stories. Routine was a shield. As long as he kept life simple, nothing could break it completely. One afternoon, he received a call from a number he didn't recognize. It wasn't the agency this time. It was a woman who introduced herself as a representative for the family. Her tone was polite but distant, like someone reading from a prepared script. She said the family had questions and wanted clarity. He asked what kind of questions. She said they were reviewing background details and wanted confirmation of his work history, personal situation, and intentions. The word intentions made him pause. He answered calmly. He said he had no intentions beyond doing his job and raising his child. He did not seek attention, money, or connection through that moment. It happened without his control. The call ended with a thank you that felt more like a checkpoint than appreciation. That evening, she called him herself. Her voice sounded tired. Not dramatic tired, but the kind that comes from carrying pressure for too long. She told him her parents were digging into his past, expecting to find something that explained why he didn't belong in their world. He told her gently that they wouldn't find much. His life had been quiet by design. She asked him about his past, not in a curious way, but in a careful one. So he told her things he rarely spoke about losing his partner, about learning how to braid hair and pack lunches, and hold back grief so a child could feel safe. He told her how driving wasn't his dream, but it gave him flexibility. It let him be present. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised him. She said her parents had everything except peace. That growing up wealthy didn't protect her from loneliness. It just made it quieter and harder to explain. As days passed, her parents continued their quiet investigation. They looked at his employment records. They contacted former supervisors. They reviewed years of clean reports. Each answer they received didn't match the image they had created in their minds. They expected someone reckless, someone chasing opportunity through scandal. Instead, they found someone who avoided risk, who left parties early to get home, who refused overtime if it meant missing a school event. This made them uncomfortable. At a family dinner, her parents argued behind closed doors. One parent insisted the kiss had been a calculated move, a manipulation. The other argued that manipulation usually left marks, and there were none. No requests, no demands, no interviews, no leaked statements. Silence became the loudest evidence. Meanwhile, he faced his own internal struggle. Part of him wanted distance from all of it. He didn't need complication. His life was already full. Another part of him felt something he hadn't felt in years, being truly seen. Not as a service, not as a role, but as a person. That feeling scared him more than judgment ever had. One evening, after his child fell asleep, he sat alone and reread old messages from years ago. Simple conversations with his late partner. Plans that never happened. Promises that were broken by time, not choice. He wondered what it meant to move forward without betrayal of the past. He didn't have answers. The agency eventually asked if he would be willing to return to normal assignments fully. He agreed. Work helped quiet the noise. Each ride reminded him of who he was before everything got complicated. Then came another unexpected request. The family wanted to meet him. Not privately, not socially, formally, with lawyers present, with boundaries clear. He considered refusing. Every instinct told him to protect his peace. But he also knew that silence allowed others to control the story. He agreed under one condition. The meeting would be respectful and brief. The day of the meeting, he dressed simply. Clean jacket, plain shoes, nothing that tried to impress. He arrived early and waited alone in a neutral conference room. No luxury, no drama. When her parents entered, they didn't greet him warmly. They didn't greet him coldly either. They sat across from him like judges who hadn't reached a verdict. They asked about his work ethic. He answered. They asked about his family. He answered. They asked if he understood the consequences of being associated with their daughter. He said he understood consequences better than most because he lived with them daily. That answer shifted something. One parent finally asked a question that had been hanging in the air since the beginning. Why didn't he take advantage of the moment? Why didn't he speak to media or ask for something in return? He looked him in the eye and said something simple. He said his child needed stability, not headlines. He said dignity mattered more than opportunity. He said attention fades, but reputation follows you home. The room went quiet. They ended the meeting without resolution. No apology, no approval, but something important happened. They stopped talking down to him. They spoke directly. After that day, things slowly changed. Not publicly, privately. Their questions became fewer. Their assumptions weakened. She noticed it too. Her parents stopped referring to him as the driver. They used words like the man or him. Small changes, but meaningful. Still, pressure remained. Her parents wanted distance. They believed emotions would fade if space was enforced. They asked her to focus on business, on public image, on future alliances that made sense on paper. For the first time, she didn't immediately comply. She didn't rush toward him either. Instead, she slowed down. She asked herself hard questions. What did she want that was expected of her? What kind of life felt honest? They spoke less often but more honestly. Short conversations about everyday things. School projects. Long meetings. Bad coffee. Nothing dramatic. Nothing secretive. He appreciated that. He didn't want to be an escape or statement. He wanted to be real. One night, she admitted something quietly. She said the kiss wasn't just about her parents. It was about choosing a moment of truth after years of pretending. She said seeing how he lived made her question how she did. He told her he never meant to become a mirror. He was just trying to survive. As the weeks passed, the shock faded for the public. But inside her family, a different kind of reckoning was happening. They were forced to confront the idea that character couldn't be bought or controlled. And he was forced to confront something else. That sometimes the most unexpected connections don't arrive to change your life loudly, but to challenge you quietly. Neither of them knew where it would lead. But both understood one thing clearly now. This was no longer about a kiss. It was about truth. Pressure does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it shows up as polite invitations, careful suggestions, and quiet warnings that sound reasonable on the surface. That was how it came next. Her parents did not forbid her from speaking to him. They were too careful for that. Instead, they began filling her schedule. More meetings, more travel, more responsibilities that required her full attention. They reminded her how visible she was, how every choice she made reflected on more than just herself. They spoke about stability, legacy, and risk. They spoke as if emotion were a phase that could be outgrown with enough structure. She listened, but something had changed in her. She no longer absorbed their words without question. She had seen another way to live, one built on consistency rather than control. It unsettled her parents because it couldn't be argued away with logic. For him, the pressure arrived differently. The agency remained supportive, but subtle changes appeared. High-profile jobs were offered, then reassigned. Schedules shifted without explanation. No one accused him of anything. Yet he felt the invisible hand guiding him away from certain spaces. One afternoon, a senior manager spoke to him privately. The message was careful but clear. Some clients preferred not to have him assigned, not because of his work, but because of the attention his presence attracted. He understood. Attention was a currency he had never wanted, yet now he was paying for it. At home, he tried to keep life normal. He attended school meetings, packed lunches, helped with projects. But children notice more than adults think. One evening, his child asked why people at school were whispering. He paused, choosing honesty without fear. He said sometimes adults talk when they don't understand something. He said it wasn't their job to worry about it. The child nodded, satisfied with the answer, trusting him completely. That trust weighed heavier than any public judgment ever could. That night, he made a decision. He sent her a message asking to meet, not to talk about feelings or conflict, but to talk about direction. They chose a quiet place, neutral and unremarkable. No luxury, no cameras. When they sat across from each other, he didn't waste time. He told her the truth, that his life was becoming unstable in small ways, that he didn't blame her, but he couldn't let uncertainty spill into his child's world. She listened, eyes steady, hands folded. When he finished, she said something that surprised even herself. She said she had been thinking about the same thing. She told him her parents were pushing harder, not angrily, but strategically. They wanted her to attend events with people who fit better. They wanted time and distance to do what confrontation could not. He asked her what she wanted. She didn't answer right away. That silence said more than words. Then she said she wanted a life that didn't require pretending. She said she was tired of being admired and rarely understood. He nodded. He told her he couldn't be the reason she went to war with her family. He said he didn't want to be chosen out of rebellion or impulse. That honesty mattered to her. It reminded her why the moment between them felt real in the first place. Still, reality pressed in. A few days later, her parents made their move. They offered her a leadership opportunity abroad. Prestigious, strategic, temporary, but open-ended. It would place distance between her and the noise, between her and him. They framed it as growth, not escape. She knew what it was. She asked for time to think. That alone caused tension. In her world, hesitation was seen as weakness. When she told him about the offer, he felt a mix of relief and loss. Relief because distance could restore peace. Loss because something honest would be left unresolved. He didn't try to influence her choice. He simply asked one question. Would she regret going? She admitted she didn't know. Meanwhile, her parents increased their scrutiny of him again, not with suspicion now, but with calculation. They wondered whether removing him quietly would solve the problem faster. They contacted the agency again, offering incentives for reassignment, not punishment, opportunity. He would be moved to a different city, a different route, a different routine. When the agency told him, he understood what was happening. This wasn't about logistics. It was about separation. That night, he barely slept, not because of fear, but because of clarity forming slowly. He realized that avoiding conflict had always been a survival skill, but avoidance had limits. The next morning, he declined the transfer. It wasn't an angry refusal. It was calm. He said stability mattered more than advancement. He said his child's school, support system, and routine came first. The agency respected the decision, but warned him opportunities might narrow. He accepted that. When she heard what he had done, it affected her deeply. Not because he stayed for her, but because he stayed for his child. That consistency stood in sharp contrast to the deals and trade she saw daily. Her parents noticed a shift in her too. She became firmer, less apologetic. She stopped over-explaining herself. Eventually, confrontation became unavoidable. One evening, she sat with her parents and said she would not accept the overseas position. She said she needed to build a life she could stand behind, not one that only looked right. The reaction was swift and cold. They warned her about consequences, about damaged reputation, about risk she didn't fully understand. She responded calmly. She said risk existed in pretending too. For the first time, they realized control was slipping. In response, they drew a line. Not dramatic, but absolute. They told her that continuing any connection with him would create permanent distance between her and certain family privileges. It was an ultimatum disguised as concern. She did not answer immediately. Days passed without contact between her and him. Not out of avoidance, but reflection. They both needed space to hear their own thoughts. During that time, he focused inward. He asked himself hard questions. Was he willing to live under pressure forever? Could he protect his child if this continued? One night, while folding laundry, his child asked if he was sad. He smiled and said he was just thinking. The child said something simple. You always choose what's right. Those words stayed with him. When she finally called, her voice was steady. She told him about the ultimatum. She didn't ask him to fight for her. She didn't ask him to wait. She simply told him she had chosen honesty, even if it cost her comfort. He told her he respected that. He told her he was proud of her courage. They agreed on something important that night. They would not rush. They would not hide. And they would not sacrifice what mattered most to prove anything to anyone. The shock, once loud in public, had turned inward. It was no longer about a kiss or a moment. It was about two people standing at a crossroads, each refusing to betray their values, even if it meant walking forward without certainty. And that choice, quiet, firm, and deeply human, changed everything. The silence between them did not mean the end. It meant both of them were thinking carefully for the first time, without fear pushing their decisions. For him, life narrowed back to what mattered most. He woke up early, packed lunches, checked homework, and drove long hours. The noise around his name had mostly faded. Online posts were replaced by new gossip. People moved on, the way they always did. But inside he had changed. He no longer felt small when he walked into wealthy buildings. He no longer lowered his eyes automatically. He had nothing to prove. Her world, on the other hand, grew louder before it grew quiet. Her parents kept their distance after the ultimatum. They did not argue again. Instead, they withdrew warmth. Invitations became formal. Conversations became short. The message was clear. If she chose independence, she would experience it fully. At first, the distance hurt. She had grown up in that house. She had learned strength from them, discipline from them. But she had also learned fear. Fear of disappointing them. Fear of stepping outside the path already designed for her. Now she was stepping outside. She did not make dramatic announcements. She simply continued her work with focus and calm. She refused the overseas position again, this time in writing. She made it clear she would lead from where she stood. Some board members were surprised. A few quietly respected it. Then something unexpected happened. A senior executive in her company resigned suddenly, leaving a leadership gap in an operations division that had been struggling for years. The department needed someone steady, someone disciplined, someone who understood responsibility at a ground level. During a strategy meeting, she found herself thinking about him, not because of emotion, because of observation. She had watched how he handled pressure without panic, how he spoke clearly when questioned, how he protected what mattered most without anger. Those qualities were rare in her world. She hesitated before acting. Recommending him would bring fresh criticism. Her parents would see it as proof that she was mixing personal life with business. But avoiding a good decision because of fear felt worse. She contacted him and asked to meet again. This time, there was no tension in the air, only curiosity. When she explained the situation, he listened carefully. She told him about the struggling division. She explained that the role was not glamorous but critical. It required oversight, structure, and someone who understood systems from the ground up. He almost laughed at first. He reminded her that he was a driver, not a corporate executive. She gently corrected him. She said he was a manager of life long before he ever stepped into a boardroom. She said leadership was not about polished language but about consistent decisions. He did not answer right away. The offer felt unreal. He had built his life around steady expectations. This was a leap. That night, he sat at the kitchen table long after dinner. Papers were spread out in front of him. Salary projections, responsibilities, risks. His child sat across from him drawing quietly. "Is it a good thing?" the child asked. "I think so," he said honestly. "But it's different. Different can be good," the child replied, without looking up. He smiled at that. Children had a way of seeing clearly, without fear of status. Still, he worried. Accepting the role would tie him publicly to her world. It would reignite whispers. It would bring scrutiny back into his life. The next day, he met with her again and asked the question that mattered most to him. "If this causes more damage between you and your family, are you ready for that?" She did not hesitate this time. "I'm not choosing against them," she said softly. "I'm choosing for myself." That answer settled something inside him. He accepted the position. The announcement was made carefully. It focused on experience, integrity, and operational understanding. It did not mention personal connections. Still, people connected the dots. Her parents reacted exactly as expected. They requested a private meeting with her first. Their disappointment was clear. They accused her of forcing a narrative, of proving critics right, of risking the company's image. She listened calmly, and then said something that surprised them. "You raised me to value strength and honesty," she said. "This is both." They turned their attention to him next. But this time, the tone was different. Less suspicion, more concern. They asked him directly if he believed he could handle the pressure, if he understood that failure would not only affect him, but their daughter. He answered simply, "I understand pressure," he said. "I've lived with it quietly for years. If I fail, it will be because I wasn't ready, not because I didn't try." There was no arrogance in his voice, only steady confidence. The first months were not easy. He faced employees who doubted him. Some saw only a former driver. Some assumed he was placed there unfairly. He did not argue. He did not defend himself loudly. He showed up early. He stayed late. He asked questions instead of giving orders. Slowly, results began to shift. The struggling division improved its timelines. Communication became clearer. Small inefficiencies were fixed. Morale rose because he listened. He treated every employee with the same respect he once gave passengers. Eye contact, patience, accountability. Word traveled upward. Even her parents could not ignore numbers. One evening, months later, she received a call from her mother. The tone was softer than before. She mentioned that the division's performance report was impressive. She admitted she had not expected that. It was not an apology, but it was movement. A few weeks after that, her parents invited both of them to dinner. Not a formal event, not a public gathering, just dinner. He hesitated but agreed. When they arrived, the atmosphere was tense but not hostile. The conversation started with business, safe topics. Then it slowly shifted. Her father asked about his child's school. Her mother asked about daily routines. The questions felt genuine this time, not investigative. At one point, her father cleared his throat and said something no one expected. "I judged quickly," he admitted. "I saw a risk where there was none." The words were simple, but they carried weight. He nodded respectfully. "I understand," he replied. "You were protecting your family." Silence followed, but it was lighter than before. By the end of the evening, nothing dramatic had happened. No grand speeches. No emotional embraces. Just mutual understanding. Outside the house, as they walked to the car, she looked at him and smiled. "Do you remember that night?" she asked. "How could I forget?" he replied. "That was the loudest moment," she said. "But this feels bigger." He knew what she meant. The kiss had shocked everyone. It had sparked judgment, rumors, and pressure. But what truly shocked people in the end was something quieter. It was that integrity held steady under scrutiny. It was that a single father who once felt invisible could walk into rooms of power without shrinking. It was that a woman raised to follow a script could choose her own lines. And perhaps most surprising of all, it was that two very different worlds did not collapse when they touched. They adjusted. Back at home later that night, he tucked his child into bed. The apartment felt the same as always. Warm, safe, honest. "Are you happy?" the child asked softly. He thought about the long road from that single unexpected moment to now. The fear, the pressure, the growth. "Yes," he said, "I am." And for the first time in a long while, he knew the answer was completely true.